Is there a typical foster child?
I can't. No, I think every situation is very different. I do not think that there's a typical. I will say that here in our county, though, we have a large percentage of teens that are in placement. And in terms of recruitment, that's a huge need for us, is finding families that can come forward to provide a high level of care for those teens in care.
Why would there be a high level of teens? One ordinarily thinks maybe of smaller children or children preteens, but not necessarily teenagers.
Well, I can tell you that if you look at the breakdown percentages, it's almost exactly about 25%, about a quarter of the kids that come into our care are age birth through 5 years old, about another quarter age 6 to 12, and then a whole 50%.
Oh dear.
13 and
what is it? Those teenage years are so aggravating for some parents.
I think for perhaps speaking as one who has parented a teen at one point, you know, it's a challenging time for any parent, and if you add to that a variety of stressors. And I think we can all say many of us have experienced a variety of stressors during this recession, and you always see it. It's something that happens across socioeconomic boundaries. All families have some variety of stress in their life, and at any time you can have an otherwise functioning family. Again, it's a matter of degree.
But aren't teenagers at that level where you can sit and reason with them?
Well, isn't that a loaded question?
I can see with little children they might not understand.
Right. I guess what I wanted to lay out for you with those percentages is another statistic, and I won't spend too much time with the statistics, but I think this is quite telling. About 40% of the cases that come to our attention are for general neglect or for some form of neglect. About another 40% are for parental incapacity and absence. That, I think, speaks volumes. I mean, you're really looking at a situation where probably these kids have grown up in many of them have grown up in very deprived situations for one reason or another, and may have had some contact with our agency, but then by the time that it reaches the threshold where we are legally able to intervene, they've been exposed to a heck of a lot already. So it's that we're not actually meeting the threshold where the law will allow us to intervene many times with families until the children have been living in that family system quite dysfunctional a lot of times for quite a while. So,
well, that seems just a little sad because, you know, you started out by saying how the laws have changed and you can't just go in the way you did once upon a time to protect the child.
Right.
Yes.
But then at the same time, you just now said by the time you do go in, that child has lived with an awful lot of trauma for a long period of time. Is that?
I think
that certainly would not be the ideal situation.
It certainly wouldn't. And I think what I didn't get a chance to finish with that was I got right up to about 1980. So in the early 90s, what we started to see with a lot of the brain research with children coming out and with developmental research was we really got a much more refined sense of how important those first 3 years in a child's life is, and how much development really takes place, and a lot of the kind of the hardwiring in the brain happens. Not that you can't work with kids after that, but we also kind of got to experience the consequence of putting the emphasis on family preservation, which in and of itself is not a bad thing, but what started to happen was, in an effort to preserve families and for the emphasis in the law to really be there, the concern of child safety fell a little by the wayside, and when we started to see the longer-term effects of that exposure, that early exposure to trauma, and the exposure to, or rather the consequences of long-term foster care, right? Giving higher rates of involvement with the criminal justice system, higher rates of homelessness, and of problems with substance abuse, there was a lot of data that started to come out that started to suggest, well, maybe we really should go back to basics and really emphasize child safety. And so in the latest federal law that Bill Clinton signed into law in 1997, the Adoption and Safe Family Act of 1997, child safety now then becomes paramount again. And there's still a balancing that has to take place between family preservation and not intervening too strenuously and child safety. But there's a tipping point that favors child safety as a matter of, at the end of the day, the child's a child.